We're only 6 episodes into Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 and it's already like the most experimental that a mainstream shonen anime has ever gotten, at least in terms of the director selection. We have a first-time series director who's already like an extremely well-respected talent in the industry, who also established his vision for the show as a whole by directing and storyboarding the first episode. For episode 2, however, we had a first-time storyboard artist putting off some incredibly experimental shots to varying degrees of success. For episode 3, we had a high-level action animator take up their first-time directorial role, giving us an action spectacle that's on par with the best that Jujutsu Kaisen has to offer. Then the production did a whole 180, bringing in one of the biggest names in the anime industry as a whole, who is an absolute veteran in action animation. For episode 5, the series director returned again for the storyboard, alongside an experienced episode director to process those storyboards. And together, they created the best episode of the entire franchise. For episode 6, we now have the assistant director of the show direct their first episode, following closely on the series director's vision. And now finally, we get to episode 7, which is perhaps the most experimental that the show has ever gotten. From what I just said so far, it's very obvious that this is a show that's prioritizing young talent in directorial roles. Though that's the case, another thing has also been consistent, and that is the role of the episode director. Storyboarding an episode is one thing, and processing those storyboards into the final product is a completely different task. Like, even if Yosuke Takada made his episode storyboard debut with episode 2, he still has a good amount of experience with taking up the episode director role, so he's very much familiar with the idea of processing the audio visuals of a storyboard. The exception is episode 3 by Naoki Miyajima. He's never been episode director before, but since he's a seasoned animator, and since there's a massive overlap in the type of works that these guys do, so it didn't really come off as a surprise when Miyajima aced his episode director debut. But with episode 7, the A part was directed by Yooto. Now, I was very impressed with Yoto's work in episode 3. I couldn't suck his dick enough there. In an episode that featured people who are like the best at their craft, like Hayata Kurosaki, Kosuke Kato, and Keiichiro Watanabe, Yooto still held his own and animated a scene that has already gone down as iconic. So since he's a very talented animator, considering the way the industry is progressing, it makes sense for him to take up the directorial role eventually, just like Naoki Miyajima did. The difference being that Naoki Miyajima entered the industry back in 2015 with One Punch Man Season 1, like 50% of the entire freelance industry did, whereas Yooto entered the industry with Sabiku Ibisco, which came out last year. Yooto most likely entered the industry in 2021. Now, the B part of this episode also had a first-time storyboard artist in Teppei Okuda, but we also had Atsushi Nakagawa, who's a seasoned episode director, to take up the directorial role for that part. Yooto did storyboards and episode direction for the A part, which is ridiculous for someone with his level of experience in the industry. Now, this is not something that has never happened before. Take the example of Hakyugo. He joined the industry at around 2013-14, and in 2016 he already made his debut as an episode director. But two things need to line up for something like this to happen. First, just that you need to be in an environment where young talent getting important roles is possible. And secondly, and more importantly, you need to be talented as fuck. And I guess both things just aligned for Yooto here. His storyboards for A part of Jujutsu Kaisen, they are incredibly dynamic, incredibly creative, partly because of his strength as a storyboard artist and an action animator, and also because Gosso is just providing him with the creative freedom to do this kind of shit. If you told me that Jujutsu Kaisen is gonna be like the home of Kannada-style animators and also have an episode with the strongest show of 2D mecha animation since forever, I would have laughed at you. And the creative freedom part really comes into play. Think inky speedlines, tons of Kannada-style cross flares, Kannada-style animation in general, multicolored Gurren Lagann explosions, the same scene flashing 3 times in your screen. This is more like a Trigger/Gainax episode. There is no hint of Gosso vision here. It's kind of shitty that I'm always having to make this comparison, but imagine if this episode was part of Chainsaw Man, where animation producer Seshimo pretty much forced his staff to reduce their idiosyncrasy with the project such that it will still appeal to the mainstream, and the director Ryu Nakayama wanted the animators to follow his vision. Mekamaru would have ended up having more detail than it had in the Jujutsu Kaisen episode. The post-to-post Kannada-style animation would be removed and replaced with fluid, lifelike motion, which combined with more detail would just make it so that you might as well use CGI at this point. But here, full 2D. That is so ridiculous. Now, constructing a mecha model that moves well while also looking pretty detailed is a very difficult task, and you need specialized people for that. And they got specialized people for that. They got freaking Sakiko Uda and Gen Asano for the mecha design in this episode, who are both talented veterans when it comes to mecha animation in general. Now, I don't think there's going to be more mecha animation in Jujutsu Kaisen or anything, so bringing 2 extremely specialized artists for this one purpose. That is for the mecha design of one episode. Those are the kind of feats that Shota Gojizono is able to pull off as a series director. Something to note here, however, is that these two were credited only for mecha design, not for mecha animation supervision or mecha animation direction, which means even with the design sheet of the mecha, how the mecha moved and to an extent also how it looked was entirely left for the animators to decide, and also the chief animation director of this episode, who is Mitsue Mori, took up the same role for episode 2 of Jujutsu Kaisen as well. But overall, the A part of this episode had a few sequences that could have looked better if it just had better animation supervision, which obviously tends to happen when extreme ambitions meets extremely poor working conditions. Also happened in episode 4, Imai's episode. The overall amount of fluid motion was not the best that Jujutsu Kaisen has seen, but the quality of drawings and the polish was just some of the best that Jujutsu Kaisen has had. Yooto just had the opposite philosophy of Imai. In this episode, movement was of absolute paramount importance, and the sacrifice came in drawings. That again goes to show the vision that Gosto has for this project. He's giving the episode directors full reign over their specific episodes, and I don't really know how much of this would have stayed true even if Jujutsu Kaisen had like a good production schedule. That is, the artists getting to do whatever the fuck they want could just be a result of that being a necessity. Otherwise, you won't be able to churn out episodes at this rate. Two things I need to say before I get into the scene by scene breakdown is that I will talk about the B part completely separately, maybe in this video itself or maybe in like a separate video, because the B part on its own, it also looks absolutely phenomenal, while also following completely different philosophies to part A. And the second thing that I'm going to talk about before getting into the scene by scene breakdown, it was a pretty significant component of this episode, that is the ghosting and the dimming. Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 must have the most useless and the most intrusive ghosting that I've ever seen in anime as a whole. Episode 3 and 4 have its fair share of ghosting, but I don't feel like it absolutely ruined my experience. It was just an inconvenience. In this episode, however, it killed a couple of scenes. Like, it genuinely destroyed the animation. I mean, yeah, it's just unfortunate. Crunchyroll is a shitty company. I have talked extensively about just how shitty they are in the past. There's absolutely no fucking reason to not also distribute the RAWs for the vast majority of viewers to enjoy the product in its full potential, just to make sure that an extremely tiny minority does not get affected, which in itself is also completely fucking useless. Like, this rabbit hole goes pretty deep. I might make an entire video about it, but also considering just how horrifyingly pathetic the production companies in Japan are, this could also be like a deliberate thing. Like, the Blu-ray is gonna remove ghosting. So, you know, if you want to enjoy the product in its full potential, buy the Blu-ray. Similar to the stupid ass censorship that ecchi shows have. This is that, but with animation. Now, I know that I've made the Sakuga is porn for me analogy multiple times, but that doesn't mean that it's supposed to be taken literally. I know that I will also be watching the Blu-ray episodes, and I also know where I'll be watching those Blu-ray episodes from. It's not like I'm gonna fall for the scam that these scumbags are running, but it still just sucks that I have to wait 6 months just to enjoy the episodes of one of my favorite shows after it already aired. Anyway, let's get into the episode. But before I do that, I also need to like change my background for when I do the breakdowns. I used a Jujutsu Kaisen background the previous time because I've officially turned into a Jujutsu Kaisen only channel. But one of the people in the comments just begged me to bring back the Ahoge background. Now, I don't know what they actually mean. I've never really used an Ahoge background in the past, but I guess I can make a new background for this one person. So when I think about Ahoge, I think about Artoria, Saber from Fate. Yeah, look at that. I mean, she definitely has like the best Ahoge. Okay, let's not talk about the ghosting at all, alright? I'll just have a comment that says, fuck ghosting. And if you're also frustrated about the ghosting, you can just reply to that one comment, because I don't really want my comment section to be filled with people saying the same thing, that is, fuck ghosting. So this scene is dimmed, it's not ghosted. Dimming is far more bearable, I would say, compared to ghosting. And anyway, this scene is by Kaito Tomioka. Yes, I guessed that when the PV came out. It's very clearly Kaito Tomioka's animation from the FX Animation Shapes. Anyway, we start with a very good drawing of Mahito's face, and then we immediately get extremely good background animation. The body language on Mahito is also really well animated here, like he's trying to find his footing. And yeah, everything here is animated by Kaito Tomioka. The backgrounds, the incredible debris animation, the effects animation, and of course, Mahito himself. Yeah, going frame by frame, these motions are just really complicated as well. Here there's an actual cut, and it's a pretty seamless cut. Like, he jumps across the camera here, and now he'll come from the top down, if I'm not mistaken. With just the background animation to carry the camera forwards, you already see the animated cracks, and now the effects animation, the water will burst through those cracks. Really well choreographed, if you get what I'm saying. Now we get an upward panning with purple Mahito eyes and the classic Kaito Tomioka effects animation. It goes back and forth and back and forth. It's also very sharp and pointy towards the end, and it also needs to go like swiping arcs. Extremely cool storyboarding technique here. There's a shadow being cast on Mahito's face. The position of the shadow is gonna remain constant, but when Mahito moves up, his entire body is gonna get engulfed in that shadow, and now he's just a silhouette. And just appreciate the idea behind the shot, that is. It's just one-dimensional colors for everything except like the streak of water, which has like 2 layers of shadows, but everything else is just one colors. You got white, red, black, and like 2 shades of blue. That's it. This entire scene has a total of 5 colors, and it's made appealing via that simplicity. Also a ridiculous amount of rubble to animate again. That's just fucking crazy. Cool reused cut from the previous episode. Very effective sound design. As Mahito comes down here, you hear that he's laughing the entire time. With this cut, we see one of the very many techniques that they have to use to make like the illusion that Mechamaru is big. Because let's take this shot out of context. You really can't tell whether he's a giant, human size, or like the size of a mouse. Animating giants is an incredibly difficult task. You gotta animate their motions differently because they just have more mass. And in anime, where everything is an illusion, you also need to play with perspectives really well to give that illusion that something is bigger than something else. So how are they selling that illusion of scale with this cut? First of all, Mechamaru is moving very slow here. Giants are supposed to move slow. But the more important thing is with the effects animation and the debris that you have on your screen. All of that stuff is just not moving. It's just entirely static when Mechamaru in the background is moving. And that also checks out. Giant bodies of dust and smoke moves very slowly. Like if you put out a matchstick, it's gonna have smoke and the smoke is gonna move erratically and very quickly, but clouds in the sky, they move very slowly. So here the debris and the dust clouds, they're just so big that they're moving very slowly, or well, in this case, not moving at all, which sells the illusion that those are extremely big objects, and which in turn sells the illusion that Mechamaru is a very giant object. Now I can give you an example of just how easily you can break the sense of scale. Imagine Mechamaru was like a tiny character. This scene, this very same cut would still work, but then the illusion would be completely different. Then the illusion would make it seem like the tiny character Mechamaru is moving so fast that everything else is still on your screen right now, but it's already pre-established in the previous cut. You have Mahito here for scale for the mecha. These are things that again would be difficult for a first-time director and first-time storyboard artist to do, but Yooto is a talented Kannada style animator. He must have used a lot of Kannada style animations as reference, so he obviously must also be a fan of mecha in general. This cut again being just a very obvious reference to NGE. Another extremely cool idea of showing Kokichi and the entire platform being tilted, because in the previous cut Mechamaru is like raising his head, tilting his chin up. Cool idea, and just immerses you into what's happening, makes it more believable. I don't really know what this charge up thing is. Mahito changed them back. That's the first thing I want to know. Since Mahito changed his body back, did he also lose his heavenly pact? I would assume not, because he also controlled a lot of mecha puppets in the previous episode, but he's also using like stored up cursed energy. And yeah, I just don't really understand how this entire thing works. Is this just the charge that he has to run this specific Mechamaru? Or is this just all the cursed energy he has as a whole? We get some of very obvious Shinsekou Kozuma style animation here, but this is from the previous episode. Here, however, you get to see multicolored explosions. Another Studio Trigger classic. It just gives the explosion more depth. Like you start off with this blue explosion, and then you get the red explosion, which is like a cross flare coming through it. And then you get another cross flare through it, which is the green explosion. So even though every layer here is flat and there's no actual sense of depth because it's all 2D animation, you can clearly feel all the volume that is being put into all of these layers because they're of different colors. And that's not even the final explosion, by the way. There's another purple color, again a new color, and that's the final smoke cloud. Next cut again, it's like a yellow-white explosion that is used for the build-up, and like it's held for a pretty long amount of time. And then with like the snappy timing, all of that build-up is just released with this beautiful looking red explosion. That is actually incredibly good explosion animation. That genuinely looks like something Satoshi Sakai would animate. Look at the way the waves are animated, the spike and the curves. If I'm not mistaken, this is Kaito Tomioka again. Yeah, those are Kaito Tomioka effects. I'm just gonna double check anyway, and yeah, it's Kaito Tomioka. What a surprise. Really cool storyboarding on the shot as well. Just look at how warped the background is, by the way. This is the bridge and it's going like on a curve like here. It's not a Dutch angle because this portion of the bridge is like straight. It's more like a fisheye angle, just to sell the scale of Mechamaru. Mechamaru is so big that the curvature of Earth needs to be taken into consideration. Sorry, flat earthers. Even though he's obviously not that big, it's still done just for that exaggerated perspective, just to sell that illusion even more. Extremely impressive cut starting from here, which is once again by Kaito Tomioka. Just so beautiful, the artwork here. Kaito Tomioka does have incredible artwork. The very fact that he was able to make drawings for a complicated model like Chainsaw Man is an achievement in itself, and the fact that he made it move so flawlessly just adds to his brilliance. So when it comes to drawing someone as simple as Mahito, yeah, it's obvious that he's gonna ace doing that while adding even more detail to his character, while also animating the background, while also animating the effects in ones. A really cool warped perspective, but Mahito is not warped here because he's not that close to the lens of the camera, but then he extends his foot and then that warped perspective appears on Mahito as well. Such a cool storyboarding technique. I don't know if Kaito Tomioka is storyboarding his own segments, but if that's not the case, then Yooto is just a master already at such a young age and with such a little level of experience in the industry. It's crazy. As much as I hate the working conditions that these animators are having to put up with, it will honestly just lead to like natural selection. Animators who care about their mental well-being will just run away from the project, as we saw in episode 2. Others will just evolve at a rapid rate and turn into a high-level talent. The next cut is also so cool. The color design changes here completely. I don't think this is dimmed or anything. Extremely contrasty shadows on Mekamaru makes him look very sinister, and of course the black shadows are the best for that. This cut, however, is very much dimmed. Mahito's eyelid has just been burned off right now, makes him look even crazier. Just a crazy number of individual line art. It's not digital lines like the ones used in Attack on Titan in the final season. These are animated lines because you see them move when I skip frames. So like Kaito Tomioka had to draw those lines for all of his keyframes here, and the in-betweeners also had to keep those lines consistent, so props to the in-betweeners as usual. This still frame is also extremely cool. The sense of depth here is so cool. Like you have like a purple super background, then you got the bridge, which is the background, then you got Mahito and all of these effects, and they truly look like they are in completely different layers. Like this bit of smoke here, it's got so much volume, it's made to look like cotton candy. And the fact that every individual layer moves separately also gives that 2.5D illusion even more. The shot is also wonderful. I don't know how much of animator input is here because it just looks like it's entirely background artwork. Mahito doesn't look like it was drawn by the animator here either. Everything here just looks like a background painting. And yeah, we get to the opening, which is just, I mean, this is a masterpiece of an opening. I have to make a big round of this. Now immediately we are moving from one main animator to the next main animator. This is extremely clear from the very first ghosted shot that it's Kosuke Kato's animation, because these are just the sketch pen-like scribbles that Kosuke Kato uses for his speed lines. And yeah, immediately starting off with an extremely classic Kannada pose. So like legs split, hands on the sides. Rule number 1 of being a Kannada style animator is that the hands need to be away from the body. After shower recording sessions are usually the best, so hope this goes well. I look like a fucking vampire. What the fuck's that about? Why is my skin so pale? I swear I'm not applying a race swap filter or anything. This is just what my face looks like after a shower, I guess. And also I changed my lighting setup, so that might be it. That's enough bullshit for one video. Let's go back to the episode. I was talking about Kosuke Kato's scene, and yeah, Kosuke Kato is just the best animator to kick off the main part of an episode, which has so much prominent Kannada style animation, because Kosuke Kato currently is one of the strongest Kannada style animators. It goes beyond just inspiration, like in Takeshi Minami's case, the Kannada style animation is still there, but there's enough animation flair on Minami's own part that it's pretty much formed a completely new style, that is Takeshi Minami style. But in Kato's case, it goes beyond inspiration and it comes to borderline imitation. It's as if with every single scene he's thinking, how would Yoshinori Kaneda animate this himself? And since Yoshinori Kaneda is one of the greatest of all time, if you imitate his animation one-to-one, you're bound to make good animations yourself as well. In this case, it's not just Mahito's pose, the debris animation is also Kaneda style. Like these are not cubic Utapon style debris, this is Kaneda style angular debris. But even with the debris that are drawn to have three-dimensionality, they're still like super angular with very sharp corners, including the ground. Just take the silhouette of the ground here. You can see how every single portion is like sharp edges. This is also a cut that sells the scale of these two characters extremely well. Like both these characters are animated at the same speed, that is animated in 2s. Skip one frame, nothing changes. Skip another frame, new drawing. And Mekamaru is sometimes animated in 3s, if I'm not mistaken. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, Mekamaru is sometimes animated in 3s. That is one drawing in every 3 frames because he's moving so slow. But what to really focus on here is the displacement of the characters between the two adjacent frames. Like when I skip frame here, look how far forward Mahito is moving. From the center of the screen all the way to almost one of the ends. Whereas in Mekamaru's case, each unique drawing is causing just the slightest amount of displacement. I gotta say this again, it's really hard to animate giants and get the perspective right in animation. But whether it's through perspectives or just animation style itself, yeah, they just pulled it off so well in this episode. Look at Mahito's hand there. That's not even a smear frame. That's just how Kosuke Kato is gonna draw his hand. Like, look at this hand as well. More speed lines here and 2 straight speed lines, along with smears on his left hand. Really nice build-up for Mahito's next action, and that build-up is released with the most chaotic smear, just how Kato did with the Toji scene as well. And yeah, all of these individual drawings are just so wonderful. The dynamic pose shifts with the sketchy smears that Kato uses on top of the characters, with again a very open body pose. And look at the displacement again between 2 frames. This changes to this. That is something that you would absolutely never see in like Western animation, for example. Western animation, you would have at least 5 in between frames before you can go from this to this. Watching this in motion, yeah, it works. Our brain fills in the gaps. That's the whole idea of animation as a whole. Like, there is no actual movement. It's just one still drawing followed up by another still drawing. And yes, while some animators can draw so fluidly that our brain barely has to fill in the gaps, Kannada style animation is absolutely not like that. Again, just look at how satisfying the landing timing is here. Yeah, that's just so cool. It's like he's building up anticipation for the landing with all of these frames, and then a very quick landing. That's the release. But naturally, you wouldn't do that for like a scene where a character is landing. Snappy timing usually works when you're easing into a motion. But here, Kosuke Kato is using for ease out. Mahito is coming to a dead stop here, and it still works. In this cut again, the illusion of scale is incredibly well done. Let's say again, without context, what does this look like? This looks like a normal sized hand that is very close to Mahito. But no, we understand that this is actually a very big hand. And the reason it looks small on your screen right now is because it's very far away from Mahito. We as the viewer already understand the scale of the fight, so the illusion is already a success. How are they pulling it off? First of all, the blur. The blur on Mekamaru's fist works in separating it from Mahito, and again the animation speed. Here the camera is panning backwards. The displacement on Mahito with the camera pan is pretty significant. Mahito is going forward pretty fast, but still the fist is coming forward extremely slowly, which also adds another layer of complexity to the cut as a whole. Because the camera is panning forwards, Mekamaru's fist is barely moving forwards because, you know, relative motion. The camera is moving backwards, Mekamaru's fist is moving forwards, so yeah, it just looks like it's not even moving. But once the camera slows down, Mekamaru's fist gets fast very quickly. Such well done storyboards, man. It's so cool. This cut again is just classic Kosuke Kato. How many times will I say it over and over again? Many times, because this entire episode is filled with Kannada style animation, as I've said many times. Extremely exaggerated in-between poses that make no sense out of context, but works well when viewed in motion. And extremely complex perspectives. The foreshortening here is absolutely wonderful. Gege definitely has a fetish, I would say, with thin-waisted individuals. Like Toji has an unrealistically thin waist, and Mahito is also like that. I mean, in Mahito's case, I guess he can literally transfigure himself to give himself a thin waist, so that makes sense at least. Again, Kato flexing with his drawings, and the only reason this is like possible is because Kosuke Kato is the main animator on the project, and I'm so glad that's the case. So far, the only animators who we've seen consistently do Genga work are main animators. I just love the sequential punching of this cut. The fist goes down, then we see Mahito again. We see the fist in the back. Fist comes down again, Mahito jumps out, and then the fist comes down again. Fist is always kept at pretty much the same location, that is the center top portion of the screen, but the camera and Mahito are just darting forwards. Such cool storyboarding again. This cut was also shown in the PV, and I didn't know that it was Kato. I guess now it makes sense. Till this frame is what was shown in the PV. If they'd shown ahead, like to this point, I would have absolutely known that it was Kato, because at this point you can tell from the effect shapes, that is the sharp edges, and the way Mahito is drawn. It is a Kannada style animator. Look at the way Mahito does his flip here. How many drawings are those? Let's check. So starting from here, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In 7 drawings, he's able to show a full flip. Of course, just having those 7 drawings won't work. You need smears. He's using spiky Yooto style smears here. You need strong, exaggerated poses that also carry like a level of momentum. Because here, from the way Mahito's body is curved, you can tell in which direction he's gonna spin. Also helps that you still got spiky smears on his back here. The next drawing is already fully upright. The smears are literally carrying the motion here. Again, a full upright pose with very good foreshortening. So like his shoulders are closer to the camera while his hands are further away from the camera. Same way his foot here is going away from the camera. Next drawing, again, just a complete disconnect between these 2 drawings. And then even more disconnect between these 2 drawings. This is a complete 180. And watching it in motion, yeah, our brain is like, that makes sense. And that works. What is impressive though is Kosuke Kato understands that our brain will make sense out of whatever he's drawing. Like while making the layout for this, from the initial drawing phases when you just have the skeleton figure, Kato already knows how many drawings to use, what poses those drawings should be in, and how to create the illusion of movement with such few drawings by using smears and speed lines. Now, where does that knowledge come from? From hands-on experience. Kato is definitely an extremely hardworking animator and has pretty much perfected his craft at this point. He's just reaping the benefits of his hard work as one of the strongest animators on Jujutsu Kaisen currently. Shot composition here is wonderful. The storyboards here are also great. You know what's going to happen to this wall. There's a giant mech behind this dam, and the main component of the shot is placed all the way here. Why do we have all this free space here? Because boom. This is also a reference to a mecha anime, this time Guy King, which is actually not that old as far as mechas go. This is from 2005. This portion is actually when Fei Heng's cut begins, at least the confirmed portion of it. Love the anticipation here, like the fist is held in that position for a long time and then the mecha just bursts through really quickly. Also a ridiculous amount of FX animation with all of this is steam plus all of the water plus smoke animation here plus of course just the debris from the bridge getting destroyed. A lot of shit to animate. Fei Heng did only do his layout here, but his layout is always so polished that most of it remains intact even in the final version. Like the way Mahito was drawn here looks awkward as hell. This is not a frame that exists in Fei Heng's layout either. In motion, it does not really matter, you don't really see it. But I assume something like this would still get corrected in the Blu-ray. Nice way to transition him into turning into a fish there. And yeah, just continuous effects animation overload. So many small droplets of water there. So much stuff to animate, that's including the smoke in the background. Hick sketchy speed lines again, that's definitely the influence of the episode director. Those fire effects look so cool. Really cool impact frames here as well is what I'm assuming at least because, you know, the effects animation here is also supposed to be very cool. I wish I could see it, man. Again, just look at the quantity of stuff he's animating. Genuinely ridiculous stuff, awesome sequence. That ends with this shot. If you note carefully, I think Mahito has changed the type of fish that he is. That's a pretty big fish, so I'm assuming he's turned into a bull shark here. Especially you can also see the gills and the classic shark silhouette here. And the reason I'm saying bull shark is because bull sharks survive in freshwater environments, so they have to go upstream to reproduce. And that's what he's doing here. He's going upstream. So to be able to go upstream, he changed the type of fish he is. That is some awesome attention to detail right there. And in the water, within the silhouette, you can also see him morphing back into his Mahito form. Like at this point, he's already morphed pretty much fully. Really cool storyboarding here as well. The camera here is not still, it's gonna move with the fist. So even if the fist is getting bigger, it's actually mostly remaining the same size because the camera is moving with it. Relative size again comes into play here because Mahito is getting smaller. That means that the fist must be getting bigger. I wish this punch had like a couple more frames before actually the punch happening. Maybe if this single frame wasn't blurred, it would have been better. But like it was a little bit confusing as to what happened while watching it initially. But I mean, once you actually focus on the scene, you can immediately tell what's happening. The problem with that is that all the cool effects animation is already gone by then. Like the speed lines and the sonic boom that's being created because of how strong the punch is. Man, just look at the metallic comp on Mechamaru right here. That looks so nice. It's just the absolute perfect amount of compositing. For a bad example of metallic compositing, look no further than One Punch Man Season 2. Man, that looked absolutely god-awful. Another pretty cool shot. This is a close-up of Mahito's hand that has sketchy smears on it, and then we transition out of it. Same Kannada style animation again, it's very pose-to-pose, but the drawings here are just, there's absolutely no polish in it whatsoever, like a stark contrast to Kosuke Kato's animation, I would say. This, I'm assuming, just did not even get past the layout phase. I absolutely love this cut here. Also, it's something that immerses you into what's happening. Kokichi is recoiling inside Mechamaru because of the punch that defines the space that Kokichi is in right now, which is the cockpit inside Mechamaru. Makes the whole setting more believable. I guess believable is not really the right word to use, but you understand what I'm saying. It reminds me of the way Asuka was animated inside the cockpit from the end of Evangelion movie. Starting from here is Benjamin Ford's animation, starting off with an extremely good perspective shot. The foreshortening here could be studied as the best example of perspective animation. Usually when foreshortening is done in animation, it's usually when a character is moving away from the camera, so he has to be made smaller. But here, it's like enlargement of a particular component that causes shortening of the rest. Like here, Mechamaru's hand is like a normal size. The camera is up high though, so when he lifts his hand, it comes closer to the camera, and thus by the end, it's just humongous. Just look how beautiful this arc is, and just how seamlessly the perspective is animated. Stuff like this is incredibly difficult to do. He makes it look like child play. Also, the pure mechanical animation here is also wonderful. These are not organic shapes. These are proper mechanical shapes. So the way the finger is splitting open and the barrel is coming through that space, that's like very difficult to animate because one wrong line and everything will look off here. Similar to how Henry Thurler talks about how it's actually easier for him to animate Kaido, because animating something as organic as like a dragon, especially from a far away view, you have to focus more on the movement than the drawings themselves, as a few lines here and there won't make a difference. But then he also talks about how it's difficult for him to draw the more humanoid characters like Luffy, because when it comes to Luffy, even one misplaced line can just completely change the character design. Here's that same thing, but compounded even more, because these are mechanical designs. There is a very small margin of error, but Benjamin pulls it off so well again. And yes, Benjamin did do his whole Genga here, so I guess he's also like a genius level animator. I already knew that, but this just confirms it. Look at that detail on Kokichi's eye there. Look at how much volume it has. The perspective, again, just so precise. And it's not just the perspective, the detail is also immaculate with the level of line work here. So the eye is on screen for 14 frames. That is just enough time for the drawing to register into the viewer's mind. And the focus in this cut entirely is definitely with the drawings. Benjamin's drawings are just immaculate here. He comes very close to the camera and then far away, sort of like how Nozomu Abe does his camera movements. And yeah, again, a drawing with just a phenomenal level of detail. Cool smears combined with zoom out again. The character acting is also wonderful. Another shot that was shown in the PV, and while it was shown in the PV, I had no idea that this mech was a giant, because when this is taken out of context, there's nothing that gives the illusion that the mech is a giant, unless have already figured out that this is a dam. But I thought this was just a high wall while I was watching the PV. That just goes to show how important this playing with perspectives and the animation styles used are to just sell the scale of animation. Here, Benjamin flexes his morphing animation, because my god, look at that. Look at how the bulges appear. Yeah, it's like 3 bulges that are enlarging, and just a 4th tumor also pops up. And at this point, it can't grow any longer, so it's just building up for a chaotic release. And the release is just so satisfying. It's a completely different cut, so I guess it doesn't count. But man, that's a lot of effects to draw again. And before you can register, absolutely annihilated by a kick. The release on that kick, again, wonderful. Look at all that build up. So much build up, and then boom, that is so awesome. Now again, I have to say, Benjamin does not have that much experience with 2D animation. He used to be a 3D animator. A good amount of the techniques do carry over into 2D animation as well. But the two things that he flexed here specifically, which is the beautiful perspective projection and the beautiful drawings, is exclusive to 2D animation. You can only exaggerate the perspectives so much in 3D animation. The models are consistent. They don't change for different frames like 2D animation does. For 2D animation, different frames are different unique drawings. There's something really therapeutic about Mahito just getting his ass kicked in the most brutal way possible. I wonder if he's actually going to get exorcised at some point, because we already do have a big bad, which is the fake Geto. And also we have Sukuna himself. So Mahito does not really need to be left alive for anything. I know there's definitely a fight coming up between Mahito versus Yuji and Todo. That was animated by Kaito Tomioka, and hopefully that was not just for show, because I really want to see that fight. Scene starting from here is animated by Hayato Kurosaki, which is actually very surprising, because he's animating here in classic Kannada style, which he's never done before. He's not really a Kannada style animator. He focuses more on realism. As you can see from this cut, that is organic Hayato Kurosaki smoke animation. Multi-layered smoke with as much detail stuffed into it as possible, and they fade away in the most natural way possible. But the 2 cuts before that, you can see, or you would be able to see if the ghosting didn't exist, that this is classic Kannada style animation. You still see hints of Hayato Kurosaki's shading there, but other than that, it looks nothing like Kurosaki's animation. After his classic detailed animation comes another cut directly inspired from NGE, and it is again classic Kannada style animation. Look at the dynamic pose shift there. Come close to the camera, go far away, and the perspective changes completely now. Head is tiny, legs are humongous, and then Kannada light flare to then hit us with a Kannada pose, very similar to the pose that Kosuke Kato also animated. Again, leg close to the camera, head far away, with the open body posture again, hands on side. The shading animation here is also wonderful to make it look like it's reflective. It reminds me of Wakame shadows. And this final cut is also obviously Hayato Kurosaki. You can tell from the way the smoke is animated. Wonderful art direction here. One of the best bits of art direction that we've seen in Jujutsu Kaisen as a whole, honestly. But there's another background artwork that's coming later into the episode that is absolutely the best that Jujutsu Kaisen has ever had. I'll talk about it when we get there. Also, digital smoke animation here. The way the steam is coming out, just animated so organically. It's animated in ones for the most part, which is why it looks so fluid. Really cool Itano Circus animation here. Character always placed in frame with beams just tracking them and following. Starting from here, this is Kyukawa's animation. I'm not going to look at it from the episode. I'm actually going to look at Kyukawa's LO for that scene to break down his animation, because the animation is showcased better in his LO than it is in the final product. Comparing the layout to the final version, it's really good. That is very polished as far as layout goes, because the models themselves, while it's absolutely not clean, right? There are stray lines thrown in there, all of this stuff that needs to be cleaned. But obviously that's gonna be done when the Genga is made. The thing is, the second key animators who had to work on the scene did not have to fundamentally change the way these character models are drawn. They just have to draw on top of that to polish it further. That is the kind of layout that is the best layout. The background animation is again phenomenal. That's a lot of trees to animate. So yeah, how do you avoid having an ugly looking CGI forest to make the character animation more dynamic? You avoid using a CGI forest as a whole. You just animate it by hand. You don't actually even see the morphing. It just uses the eye as a transition. And this is, I don't exactly know what kind of creature that is. Cool explosions and spark effects here. Really well done. Very snappy timing with the jump here with smears being used. The dog thing then goes under a tree. Man, that's so good. The way this tree is coming close and then we go underneath it. This is gonna look so good in the Blu-ray version. He also flawlessly rotates the entire background here. Man, that's crazy. Explosion, the dog thing is spinning in the air now. Smear comes close to the camera and then changes model again. It's now a bunny. A bunny that's running upwards and spirally through a tree. Missed opportunity to use a hamster instead of a bunny there. So that's where Q-Kawa's part ends. Then we get like the classic shonen speedline background that transitions to the next cut. This cut is animated by Toshiyuki Sato. I'm so happy to see him animate action again, because for the longest time he's been specifically focusing on character acting. Maybe because there are so many projects that he wanted to work on. He did not just do character acting animation in Butchie, he also sculpted a clay model for Butchie. Why did Butchie the Rock's team get one of the industry's strongest action animators to sculpt a tiny Butchie figure? I don't know. Butchie the Rock's creators are just masters of shitposting. The background animation looks even stronger in Toshiyuki Sato's cut. Maybe because the second key animation here is also done by a very good animator. The second key animation for the Toshiyuki Sato sequence is done by Masaho Hori. I hope I'm saying that correctly. They animated the scene in Spy X Family, and yeah, the artwork is really good. People with good artwork are the best to do second key animation, because that's what second key animation is about. The shading work especially is so complex. This is still dimmed, which makes some of it hard to see, but it's at least not ghosted. Look how he's rotating the tree. So good. Then the tree just gets obliterated by all of the beams. Really nice morphing animation here again. Mahito's broken the code. Going back to Monkey, always the best option. Sato is not really animating in his prominent Kannada style here, and is actually focusing more on fluidity, which is actually a rarity coming from Sato in his action animation. When it comes to action animation, Toshiyuki Sato is first and foremost a Kannada style animator, but when the context of the specific scene calls for it, he can also animate in like the hyper-fluid, hyper-realism style. Sato is a master of all trades. It's the reason why even though he was a Kannada style animator, he was also able to animate in Chainsaw Man. And yeah, here the movements have a lot of keyframes. It's very fluid, not like extremely fluid, but it's still not like timing dependent post-to-post Kannada style animation either. Watching this for the first time, I thought this was Takafumi Mitani, but I guess Sato is credited. Also, look how he's hopping over the beam right there. So cool. Even just before that jump, look at how much volume is given to the forest. These three different shades, and that is really enough to give the sense of depth there. This explosion and fire animation also looks more traditionally animated and not like the way Sato usually displays his idiosyncrasies when it comes to fire and explosion animation. He uses heavy brush strokes with fire, which is pretty much his signature style, but he can also mix those brush strokes with a ridiculous amount of particle detail, and that's how the iconic Sato lava was formed. I like it the best in Promare actually, because the color design just perfectly complements Sato lava animation there. The next sequence is animated by Daisuke Nakawa and Atsushi Ikaria together. The bigger name here is definitely Atsushi Ikaria. He's a big name veteran animator, and all the way back in 2011, he first brought the Fate characters to life, doing the character design work for Ufotable's Fate Zero. I know Fate anime also existed before Ufotable, I'm just ignoring it. And yeah, Ikaria has been the character designer for the entirety of Ufotable's Fate franchise henceforth. So how the hell did he randomly appear in Jujutsu Kaisen project? The same way Arifumi Imai came into the project. Remember how I said Yooto's first work in the anime industry was in a project named Sabikui Bisco? Guess who directed that show? And since this is Yooto's directorial debut, I'm assuming he just called Ikaria up for some help, and yeah, that's how we got this awesome scene. Whole portion here animated in ones, with a lot of ghosting though, but the animation in ones still keeps up. This is honestly some of the least polished that Ikaria's work has ever had, especially the way Mahito's running in this scene. It looks kind of awkward, but I really love the timing on Mahito's landing here. So he hits his body and then the next frame he's already upright. Also, I love how once he stands up, he immediately starts surfing on top of Mechamaru's arm. That would look floaty, but it doesn't because he's also animating the smoke effects accordingly. And yeah, this cut does look a little bit awkward, but I mean, it's a very complicated cut. There's only so much you can do with the time you're given. The portions beginning from here is animated by Daisuke Mataga, who's another animator who's brought into this project for this one cut by Yooto's connections. This one cut is again a little bit awkward because it lacks detail. It just does not have enough of it, and that's because it is a zoom out shot. As I'm skipping through frames, Mahito is getting a little bit smaller because the camera is panning backwards. The focus here is on the blade and not on the face of Mahito itself, which is why Mahito's face lacks a little bit of detail. This happens one more time in another one of his cuts. The storyboards and the way this portion is directed is again very Gainax inspired. Still frames, but impactful still frames. Every cut feels like a new beginning instead of continuing from the previous cut. You see Mahito here, you see an impact frame, and you see him cutting open all the wires. Now the next cut is a panning shot that begins from the downward up. It feels like an entirely new scene even though it's supposed to be continuous. Watching it in motion, you can probably tell what I'm talking about. See that it's not necessarily flowing properly, and that in this case is intentional because this is how a lot of Gainax fights go. More beautiful effects animation, it's actually just cross flares and simple circles with a good amount of lightning animation thrown in there as well. Thick meaty lightning animation. It's not continuous in the way Kutsuna lightning would flow, but it's drawn in the same way as Kutsuna lightning is. And this is another very cool direction choice, giving us a far away shot of Mechamaru now, and all those beams that were tracking Mahito have now lost track of Mahito and just explode behind Mechamaru right here. It reminds me a little bit of Ko Horio's scene from the Goso Osama ranking episode, which reminds me I really want Shota Gojisono to get back into action. And this is the second cut that I was talking about that's a little bit awkward. Honestly, this is far more awkward than the previous one because this definitely needed a little bit more AD input. I think the main issue here is his body is so well drawn and the face looks so goddamn awkward though. The reason for that again is that this zoom is just a regular old panning zoom. It's not an animated zoom. When you're taking the camera closer, you need to ensure that you add more detail as the camera is getting closer to the character. This is what I mean when I say an animated zoom, where every single frame of the zoom is a unique drawing. This gives the animator much more control over the amount of detail they can pour into a scene. This is not an animated zoom. As we're skipping frames here, especially after this one portion, you can see that there's no added detail. The camera is just slowly closing in on Mahito. So while there's nothing wrong with the initial shot itself, because this is about as much detail I would expect in a shot at this distance to have, but because it's closing in, it ends up looking awkward. Again, it's not awful by any means. There are panning zoom shots that are hilariously bad, but it still looks awkward, especially when combined with the animation. He turns his head very quickly here, and then for the rest of the frame, it's like very still. So what they could have done here, or how I would approach this scene if I had animation talent, is that I would just slow down the head turn. Instead of this and then zooming in slowly, it would look better if it was just slow motion the entire time and Mahito stared at the camera at the end of the cut. This fist coming closer to the camera is also very limited, but it's making very good use of that limited animation through the animation timing. It's really good. First, it's building anticipation just from the effects animation. The ghosting does suck, but it's not that intrusive in this case. And after that pop, you see it come very close to the camera, and now it's held there for so much time. Again, building anticipation, just to end with that punch. Another case of a little bit of awkwardness here because the good drawings, like these ones, they just go past the camera very quickly, and what we're actually looking at for the majority of portion is a drawing that has very little detail, but it's far away, so it makes sense. But this is not a low detail cut by any means because it starts off with drawings that are really damn strong. One of my biggest pet peeves, at least when it comes to animation, is my eyes not registering detailed looking drawings in regular motion. That rarely happens because usually the timing is very deliberate to show off the good looking drawings, but in rare cases it does happen when like really beautiful looking drawings just disappear like this and you absolutely do not notice them. The best example of this I can use is from My Hero Academia. Like, look at this drawing. I bet you did not know this drawing existed. It's from season 6 of My Hero Academia. The problem is that it's pretty much impossible to perceive it in regular motion. This is another still frame, but man, that line art is so good. This reminds me a lot of Gosei Oda's drawings for Mob Psycho season 1 episode 3. This cut is not credited for now, and it's really cool. I love how the steam is coming out of the crevices of Mechamaru. This is a very classic Kannada animation technique again. It's called Obari Punch. The way it starts is a pose like this with foreshortening in the backhand. Then the face comes close to the camera. Then the chest comes close to the camera. And finally ending with the punch to the camera. In this case, it's a middle finger thrust to the camera, but you get the idea. A very good example of Obari punch would be this scene animated by Sugita. No, there's no particular reason for me to use this scene other than the fact that, yes, this is just classic Obari punch example. The shading for this is also absolutely wonderful. Man, these are just flawless corrections. The way the metallic nature of Mechamaru here is shown, not through compositing, but simply through the way the shading is done on top of him. This does not look as much like light falling on this portion. It looks more like this portion is shining because it's metallic. Like you see this strand of lightness just going in specific areas, and also the spiky portion right here as well. This portion is animated by another foreign animator, Rodrigo Vegas, and they're also animating in classic Kannada style. This is literally the first Sakuga sequence that he's ever animated, at least as far as I know. So I don't know if he's a Kannada style animator or if he's just following the director, Yooto's guidance in animating this in a specific Kannada style way. All of the Kannada foreshortening techniques are applied here. Such a cool perspective shot. And the way his sweat is moving is also so cool. It's unrealistic, but it's so cool. Like you see the sweat droplets coming off of his face here. I don't know why I'm pointing. I should use the mouse pointer. It comes off from both sides and then it goes like along his hands. Just look at this perspective. That's what? Almost 50% of the screen. And then his body and head is like tiny all the way back here. All the flashbacks being shown in the background is also such a really cool idea. It's very cheesy, but in a nice way. The same kind of cheesiness that you do get from Trigger and Gainax shows. Sketchy speed lines, all on Kokichi here. And the funny thing here is that this is not even the most Gurren Lagann inspired cut in this episode. That comes later. A lot more cross layers here. Really cool. Well, it's not background animation, but it's animated with the same philosophies of background animation. The way we are panning up. Remember how I talked about animated zoom ins and animated zoom outs? This is an animated zoom out. So we're zooming out of this shot, but every single drawing with Mechamaru, where we're zooming out, is a unique drawing. So when we start off close, it has a lot of detail, especially with the wiring here. Portion starting from here, animated again by Shinsuko Kozuma. This shot is incredibly detailed. Look at how much detail he's putting into the frenulum of the tongue. You can see the stretching of the frenulum so well here. He's drawn it so well. And the way the skinless portion of his face is drawn is also really cool. The striations of the muscle, the cavity where the nose was supposed to be. The movement in the shot comes from the hair and the hands. Hands, of course, being notoriously hard to animate. Mini hands drawn in completely different perspectives in the background, which is cool. But the hands that are in the foreground are even cooler. All of the hands are animated in twos, but it's animated in like a staggering fashion, so that when one hand is not moving, the other one is moving. Technically, the scene is not animated in twos. It's animated in more than ones. Every drawing is not lasting for 2 frames. Every drawing is lasting for 0.667 frames, because there are 3 completely different animated components that are all animated in twos. These 2 hands are animated together. So that's 2 divided by 3, 0.667. This is also what director Samuel Dietz was explaining on how when you're animating many components on screen simultaneously, the animation goes beyond 24 FPS. There's also something really satisfying about the way the obliteration of like Mechamaru's pieces are animated here. The hands just cut through him like butter. The next cut is reused animation from season 1. This was animated by Kai Shibata. And if you want to have a direct comparison of the compositing upgrade that the season has had, look no further than this scene. No ugly texture work on the hands or the animation whatsoever. I wonder who animated Mahito here though, because that looks very much like Kai Shibata's animation again with Tanaka corrections. And the keyframes here are too different to just directly move on to second key animators. So this needs proper key animator input. I'm just wondering who did it. Other than that, even how Mechamaru comes sweeping into the shot is very similar to the way Nanami comes sweeping into the same kind of shot. Shots like these are when you can clearly see the animation director input, because this is drawn by a really good artist who's following the character design sheet made by the character designer. You can tell from the way Mahito is drawn. I know his cheeks might look a little weird here, but that's just to make him look more sinister here. It's not really a bad drawing. Mechamaru here is part of the background painting, at least as far as I can tell. That allows the painting work on Mechamaru himself to be a lot more detailed here, and it looks gorgeous here. I love how the way the dents on Mechamaru are animated as well. Black highlights on the cracks combined with like grey brush strokes to give it depth. Every single individual component of this season is like so strong, like compositing, art direction, animation, and especially direction. I love the way Mahito is sitting down here as well. It looks like the way traditional people in high positions would like sit down. That makes sense. He's a curse, and curses in general have been given associations with religion in Jujutsu Kaisen, and Mahito is like the perfect blend of a new school and old school curse. As soon as he does the transfiguration technique, the eyes on the mecha lose the color and just turn off. So I really thought that Kokichi was dead, but that would also be like very much anticlimactic. So no, obviously he's not dead. Mechamaru turns back on right here with all the red lights glowing. Another good example of, guess what? An animated zoom. Mahito starts off with very little detail because he's far away, but now we are getting closer and closer, and you can see the detail physically being added on top of Mahito. Yeah, the difference between this frame and this frame. It's not all that prominent, but it makes a huge difference. This is again a mix of key animator input and a lot of Doga input as well. And once we get close, we now flip the camera, we go overhead. The rotation on Mahito is done so well. The perspective is absolutely flawless. Going into the next cut, another extremely cool perspective drawing. His abdominal muscles have just the right amount of volume. The shading of all of the muscles in all of the crevices is what gives it that depth. Whoever drew this has like mastered human anatomy. And then you see Mahito's stomach inflation and then explosion of blood. Really cool blood animation here as well. Yeah, that's gorgeous. This drawing is also really nice, very detailed, and awesome Doga work here as well. It's animated in twos, but the changes between drawings is very little. So that's definitely a lot of Doga input. Next cut, again, as classic as a Gainax shot can get. The same frame, hand bottom to up, very fast, thrice. This cut is also so far uncredited, but I'm very sure that it's Yooto. I've already talked about this cut in the PV. It was shown in the PV as well. And a lot of people were saying that this was supposed to be from the end of Shibuya. I guess they were just wrong. I do remember a couple of comments saying that this was before Shibuya as well, so that makes sense. That also means that we are going to get more Miwa action later into the season, which is going to be pretty cool. I hope she does not die. She's too fucking precious to die in a brutal way. Just kill Gojo or Yuji again. They'll make it. But yeah, I broke the scene down in the PV as well. And from the way the shape of the FX animation is drawn, it's very clearly a Yooto drawing. Really cool looking Kannada light flare here there again. Nice timing on the draw here as well. First very quick, then build anticipation with the slowdown, and then really quick again. And these slices of FX animation is like representing the new shadow style technique, and they disappear, but then they're shown again. But this time it's on Mahito. Extremely cool morphing animation. Mahito has no shortage of looking absolutely fucking ugly throughout Jujutsu Kaisen, and yeah, this is another one of those examples. Yeah, the way it morphs into a horse, a fish coming out of the horse's mouth, and the fish changes into like a pig for a split second, I think. Yes, this is gorgeous body horror. Body horror is like one of the most underrated subsets of Sakuga animation. So glad to see it here. Mahito actually takes a page out of Mekamaru's book here. When Mahito uses transfiguration technique, Kokichi turned off Mekamaru, which made it look like Kokichi was dead. But now Mahito is doing the same thing. After he was stabbed, he just switched off his domain, which made it look like he was dead. And yeah, Kokichi really thought that he was the protagonist. Nah man, we already got 3 protagonists for Jujutsu Kaisen. We got Yuji, we got Gojo, and we got Yuta. You're not the main character, man. As much as I'm memeing, that is also a driving point of Kokichi's character as a whole. It is totally understandable for a teenager to do everything that Kokichi did here. A lot of effects animation here again. And also I love how the smoke is like following Mekamaru's silhouette here. This portion of the smoke is like curving along Mekamaru's head shape. Same with this arc as well. It's like an animated smoke bubble around Mekamaru. It looks really cool. Lovely shot again. I wish I had the production material for this shot. I would love to use this as the thumbnail. Another drawing that was shown in the PV. Clearly animation director input in this one as well because of how strong Kokichi looks here. And yeah, another extremely cheesy cut of having the FX animation convert into like Miwa's hair. I swear I've seen something like that in Gurren Lagann. The Miwa drawings here are fantastic as well. Going frame by frame, you can see the sheer level of detail in each one of these drawings. And yeah, that is just as cheesy as you can possibly make that scene. The drill is actually not touching Kokichi. Kokichi's getting hit by this piece of rubble that is part of the mecha because Mahito's coming drilling into it. And yes, starting from here is again animated by Yooto, and this entire portion is just literally Gurren Lagann. He only properly did the layout for this portion, but his layouts are already very well completed. And who's to say that he also did not do the correction work for this scene as the episode director, because that does happen a lot of times. What is special about this is that the character designs change completely. This is absolutely not the way Kokichi's design was drawn by Sayaka Koiso. The way the drill comes closer to Kokichi's face is also like classic old school Gainax because it's not really animated coming close to him, it's just hand forward. It's like dragging a PNG forward. It in itself is animated because you can see that it's rotating, but it's not being animated moving closer to Kokichi. And again, that is a stylistic choice. Yeah, the ground breaks and Mekamaru jumps forth in an explosion of beautiful effects animation. Look at the extremely clever way that Yooto is using colors here. First, we see explosion and debris. You don't need a lot of separation between explosion and debris itself, but you need to know where Mekamaru is. Mekamaru is almost the same color as the rest of the debris, which makes it hard to focus on him. So you need a focus point on Mekamaru, and that's what the eyes do, completely contrasting the colors of the background, glowing neon green color. And yeah, I'm just constantly being blown away by just how talented Yooto is. This is his first time storyboarding in anime. This specific portion was also animated by him, is showcasing his vision in the purest form, sort of like the scenes animated by Gosso in the episodes that he also directs and storyboards. And yeah, this is just unreal talent. I'm expecting him to work with Studio Trigger projects pretty soon because this is like a noticeably impressive amount of talent, which is obviously going to come with a high level of influence. Awesome pose on Mekamaru here. Swear I've seen this in other shows as well. I mean, this entire episode could be summarized in, I swear I've seen that in other shows, but this fits Jujutsu Kaisen so well as well. No opportunities missed in making Mahito look as grotesque as possible. That looks disgusting. Remember what I talk about take from previous and apply to Jujutsu Kaisen? Isn't this the best example of this? Jujutsu Kaisen has a very specific way of animating cursed energy. Kanada style animation has a very specific style of animating light flares. Yooto mixes the two of them to make a cursed energy light flare, and that is the coolest thing in this episode for me. The flow between scenes here are also particularly good, like the shift on Mahito never breaking the 180 rule, and then Mahito zooming out. Another fantastic piece of animation. God damn, that's a lot of hands to draw. Awesome perspective animation here on Mechamaru. Look at how busy this scene is, but everything looks perfect again. Nothing is overwhelming, everything can be kept track of easily. Even though it's dimmed, I'm pretty sure that this is dimmed. It's not ghosted, which helps a lot. This whole portion is a direct reference to Sushio's scene from the Gurren Lagann movie. Down to the way the animation is timed is almost exactly the way Sushio did a scene. Sushio is one of the most well-respected and highly regarded animators that there is in the anime industry. He's an absolute legend, and his scene from the Gurren Lagann movie is quite possibly his best one. He's also using all kinds of tech on Mechamaru here. Like right now you see cursed energy manipulation. That is to make claws on Mechamaru's hand. On the next volley of hands, he takes that a step further. The claws are now coming from his forearm as well. And in the next shot, when he just gets engulfed with hands, you need a true Gurren Lagann power right now. So of course he pulls out the fucking drills. Now we get to see the ultimate cannon. These impact frames are beautiful, but they're completely obliterated. Are we going to see at least one good impact frame in the season, like at all? That is not like completely ghosted to death. If we do get a Miso episode, that's going to be filled with impact frames. And if this is the treatment that impact frames are going to get, I don't think there's a point. And my god, look at how beautiful this one frame is. If it wasn't dimmed and moreover ghosted, it would look so much better. Love the colors on the fire as well. Again, compare this to the ultimate cannon from season 1, where they went for a more realistic texture work on the fire. Look at this and tell me that looks better. This is so heavily stylized for this specific scene, and it works so well. Just completely shreds through Mahito's hands here. It's not necessarily all that many layers of effects, but the layers that do exist have a lot of animation to put into them. Yeah, Mrs. Mahito, another drawing that looks like it's straight out of a trigger show. And here you go the opposite route, that this actually has a lot of layers. The 2.5D effect is really strong here. The reason I'm saying 2.5D and not 3D, by the way, is just because it feels like flat textures layered on top of each other. This feels like a 3-dimensional space with 2-dimensional cutouts placed at the regular intervals. It's mostly a still frame, first to show the chaos from one area and then to show the origin of that chaos panning all the way to Mahito. So many layers here. Yooto using colors beautifully again. It's a very red shot, yes, but every single layer is so visible. And look at the way Mahito's hair is colored, like a deep blue. I don't think I've ever seen this color on Mahito's hair before, and that just looks so gorgeous. If I had to guess, I would say these two still frames that had like a lot of still debris with the 2.5D effect is like a reference to Kai Ikarashi's Cyberpunk episode. This is probably the most fiendish that Mahito has ever looked. The way he throws hands forward is again like a direct reference to how the anti-spiral his hand forwards and it splits into like wires. More of the same extremely cool shit. I love this angle so much. And yeah, Kokuchi just explodes out of the Mechamaru. And now we have this cut. I wonder what this is a reference to. And then with this very clean cut, I guess Mahito was just quicker, wasn't he? Transition to a black and white animated cut. This is not carrying any of the models forward whatsoever. Like this does not have the hands or the stabby thing. This just carries the motion forward. So all of the speed lines that exist, they are color inverted and made bigger. Yeah, that's what the next cut has. So even if the models themselves don't exist anymore, like the hands and the piercy thing, you can still feel the motion. That's where that ends. Yooto showing that he's not just a master of out of context action. He can also really drive in emotional moments like this whole portion. This is again gorgeous AD work. I genuinely don't think Miwa has ever looked this good in the show. What would be Jujutsu Kaisen without a little bit of metaphorical storytelling? I mean, Mechamaru's place in the darkness here for a very obvious reason. If you go way back as well, I noticed while rewatching some of the openings I like. In the second Jujutsu Kaisen opening by Shingoyama, there's this specific scene. And now with context, it's very easy to tell that, yeah, this was already foreshadowed. Really nice hand animation here. The perspective is very well conveyed. And yeah, just the drawings are so good. This almost looks to me like a Sota Yamazaki drawing. Clearly a lot of effort went into the segment with the drawings. Love the dynamic shadows here as well when she turns her face. Yeah, the idea of the light being cast on her face, so well well done. This portion is still in the shadow because of her nose, so that gives depth to her nose, which is literally 2 lines. Stuff like this makes so much difference, and it's not easy either. Like, the shadows also have to be animated frame by frame by an animator. Mekamaru is part of the background here again, and it's just completely obliterated. I guess Mewa won't be getting closer to Kokichi anytime soon.
Reality can be whatever I want.
And it will be canon for us. Just before I get into part V, I just want to talk about the difference that compositing can make a really good background painting, right? This is showing like what Shibuya, this area looks like after the Shibuya incident. This is before. The painting is reused. It's just that the comp makes all the difference. Let's talk about the staff here first. Part B is storyboarded by Teppei Okuda, who's also a first-time storyboard artist. He's a pretty good action animator. As for the direction for this portion, it's by Atsushi Nakagawa again, and Atsushi Nakagawa is going 2 for 2 for incredible direction. The B part of this episode is a lot more polished. Okuda aced his storyboards, Nakagawa processed those storyboards to perfection, but the MVP for this portion is not either of them. It's Takafumi Mitani, who animated this entire portion with the crowds. And it goes beyond just animating this portion, because I'm very sure he also did character design for all of these characters. The reason I'm saying that is because these are Takafumi Mitani's character designs. Like, look at these women. Have you seen other characters in Jujutsu Kaisen look like these women? No. Jujutsu Kaisen has thin line art, specifically with facial highlights of characters. Here the lines are thicker than what you usually get from Jujutsu Kaisen. And while Sayaka Koisu's designs are very well defined, none of the lines will have like random jitters here and there. Whereas Takafumi Mitani's designs are much more organic. Here, I'll pull that up. Look at this portion of the lady's hair here. If this was Sayaka Koisu's design, this portion would just go like this, but instead it's going like this. These characters look like they're straight out of the show Super Crooks, which is a Bones production. You should be able to see the similarities of the shape of the chin and the overall organic shape of the lines. And yeah, Takafumi Mitani was the character designer of that show, and Koki Fujimoto was actually the main animator there. Anyway, it is insane to me that Mitani not only had to draw all of these characters, not necessarily character design sheets, because you're not going to animate them from different perspectives, different times, because they are just one-off characters, right? But the fact that he did that for this many characters who all look completely different. Like here, he had to come up with what Ghostface would look like in this particular art style, and what Hot Dog Man would look like in this art style. The way the fabric is animated on this dude is just flawless. And finally coming to these two women again. These two look like they could be main characters in a different show. Every single one of these characters looks so good. The reason he wasn't credited for sub-character design for this episode, despite these being literally his character designs, I'm assuming is because he's also animating these scenes, so he's not technically making character designs for the production as a whole, as other people are not using it. The way this lady moves pretty much encapsulates Takafumi Mitani's animation, by the way. Low, very subtle motions, and again, this guy's face. I'm laughing because this looks nothing like a Jujutsu Kaisen character, and it looks like it's straight out of Super Crooks, especially because they're wearing superhero costumes here, and superheroes is what Super Crooks is about. It's like a better version of The Boys. Characters here still animated by Takafumi Mitani. Such an insane workload for one person. He didn't do anything after episode 1, if I'm not mistaken. So for that entire duration, I'm sure that he was working on this one specific scene, because all of this just must have taken an unholy amount of time to make. Again, just so many characters to draw. It causes me physical agony, imagining the level of work that he had to put into this. This bubble animation as well, I've already broken down this in the PV breakdown. Extremely gorgeous shading on the individual bubbles, at least 4 layers of shading on all the bubbles. Look at the way the keep out tape is moving. The detail put into a frigging tape. Look at how beautiful this lady in the background looks, or how much artistic intent went into drawing this clown who was very far back from the camera. The amount of work that must have gone into something as insignificant as that. Combining a lot of small insignificant things is how you make something very significant, and that's what Mitani is doing here. The most complicated cut is actually yet to come. You see one person pop up in the background first, then there's 2, 3, and then a lot of people, to the point where you just don't need to animate the individual people anymore. This cut also I already broke down in the PV. A ridiculous number of people to animate, all doing their own separate poses, and the ones in the foreground also having a ridiculous amount of detail. So he had to do costume design and character design for all of these people. Costume design I'm pointing out specifically because all of these guys have such varied costumes. He worked with the storyboards and made all of this animation as well. For all we know, he might have had a lot of help from a large number of talented second key animators for this. That still does not undermine the level of work that Mitani put into this specifically. And yeah, the way he's animating people here reminded me of the way Keitsuro Watanabe animated like a group of spirits in Mob Psycho Season 2 Episode 5. I'm sure that this is inspired by that in at least some level. A lot of characters, low detail characters passing by the screen, but then you get this extremely high detailed banana men, both of them. Yes, this is the background artwork that I was talking about previously. This is the best background painting that I've seen in Jujutsu Kaisen ever. This is Junichi Higashi's masterpiece. If this text here did not exist, this would be my wallpaper. That's how much I like this. The colors are just so incredibly gorgeous, especially the horizon. The blue aurora with the horizon is so good, and the way it interacts with the edge of the veil and is bouncing off of these buildings, masterful work. Really nice Shota Kushizano impression here with the fisheye effect. I don't know if he was directly involved for this or not. I also like how the characters just like that, they go back to Sayaka Koizo's designs. Much more even line work, no ruggedness or small imperfections in the way the lines are drawn, and the line art also going back to thin Sayaka Koizo lines. When it comes to this scene, again, a good amount of movement, but I have to talk about the background artwork again. This is so insane. Some of Higashi's best work since episode 1. Look at Kogisaki here. She shifted her gaze on Maki. She notices something on Maki, like a lint or something, I'm guessing, and then she just picks it up. So you're focusing on the subtitles, reading what's happening, but you also see this happening in the background with the corner of your eye. That not only gives more movement to the scene, but also builds characters much better than something like Naruto vs Sasuke, for example, where they just say they're good friends without actually showing us. And then Maki just doing this because Nobara is distracting her. Two things I don't understand related to the plot, and that is that Naobito Zenin guy, who's the Zenin clan leader, of course, which ties into the politics of the Zenin clan because, of course, he's here so that Maki does not get promoted to first grade. With Naobito, he's written as Special Grade 1 Jujutsu Sorcerer. So what is he? Is he like a special grade or a grade 1? In Jujutsu Kaisen 0, both Gojo and Geto talk about how there are 4 Jujutsu Sorcerers who are classified as special grade. We've already seen 3 in like the first arc of this season. And I don't know if for the 4th one, Yooto was included or if they were talking about the Zenin guy. Going back to the crowd, the characters no longer look like they were drawn by Takafumi Mitani. The faraway characters don't have faces either, which is not how Mitani drew them. Mitani drew the faces on even when they were far away from the screen. This is still a ridiculous number of people to draw, and I'm sure like this took a lot of effort, but it really does not feel impressive anymore because we already saw the peak of crowd animation by Takafumi Mitani. Like these 2 girls, they look great, alright? They're really well drawn, but they are no Mitani girls. This crowd shot looks really good again, like a lot of detail with the characters. It almost looks like the way Ninuma draws his crowds, but with a little bit less detail. Really nice hand animation with Gojo, of course. His hands, they are like the most sexualized part of his design as a whole. And yeah, that's it. That's the episode. A part and B part had completely different philosophies when it came to animation. One going for absurd action spectacle, whereas the other going for intricacy and polish, which is exactly what I wanted from Chainsaw Man. I wanted the mundane moments to be just as delicately animated, but I also wanted them to go apeshit with the action animation. Neither is objectively better, just comes down to personal preference. I'm sure a lot of people must have disliked the first half of this episode. When it comes to me, I don't necessarily critique the artistic choices when it comes to the style of a particular scene or an episode as a whole, as long as the execution is good. And yeah, the execution for both parts of this episode was pretty much flawless. Yoto's portion had a little bit more unfinished stuff there, but that makes sense because of the sheer level of ambition that he showed for his first time directorial role. I still can't fucking believe it. That's so crazy. We will be observing Yoto's career with great interest. If you like this video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Subscribe and share, spread the love. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks for the views.